Rain. Not gentle rain, a punishing, relentless downpour, turning Monaco's ribbon of asphalt into a mirror of chaos. And through it, one car is simply gone, vanished into the mist, 30 seconds ahead of the entire field, as if the storm itself had chosen a favorite. This was Ayrton Senna, and this was only the beginning of a story that would define what it means to never give up. Born on March 21, 1960, in São Paulo, Brazil, Ayrton Senna da Silva grew up far from the glamour that would one day surround him. He was a boy obsessed with speed before he was old enough to understand what speed truly meant, tearing around a makeshift kart built by his father in the family's backyard. Karting became his classroom. By his teenage years, he was already a national champion in Brazil, a prodigy whose reflexes and racecraft made grown men nervous to line up beside him. But talent alone does not carry a working-class dream across an ocean. Senna left for England in 1981, chasing the only path that mattered to him, a place in Formula One. He arrived in a country that was cold, unfamiliar, and utterly indifferent to who he had been back home. In Formula Ford and then Formula 3, he had to prove himself from nothing, racing against rivals who had money, connections, and comfort he did not have. He won anyway. In 1983, he claimed the British Formula 3 championship in such dominant fashion that the paddock could no longer look away. Formula One came calling in 1984, and Senna signed with the modest Toleman team, not a powerhouse, but a foothold. It was enough. At the Monaco Grand Prix that year, in only his sixth Formula One race, a young unknown in an underpowered car began carving through the rain like it was a language only he could speak. He climbed from the back of the grid toward the lead, hunting down the legendary Alain Prost, closing the gap lap after impossible lap, until the race was stopped early due to the conditions, with Senna a mere seconds behind. The result would forever be debated, but the message was unmistakable. A new kind of driver had arrived, one who did not merely tolerate chaos but seemed to thrive inside it. That drive. The refusal to accept limitation, to accept the car he was given as the ceiling of what was possible, became the thread that ran through everything Senna did next. In 1985, now with the Lotus team, he delivered on that Monaco promise, winning his first Grand Prix at a rain-soaked Estoril in Portugal, lapping much of the field in conditions that left other drivers helpless. It was not luck. It was a signature being written in real time. Over the next 3 years at Lotus, Senna established himself as perhaps the finest qualifier the sport had ever seen, a man capable of finding tenths of a second that seemed to exist nowhere on the stopwatch until he found them. But he wanted more than brilliance in isolation, he wanted a car capable of carrying him to the summit. In 1988, he got it, joining the dominant McLaren team alongside a rival who would come to define his career as much as any trophy, Alain Prost. What followed was one of the most intense rivalries in the history of sport. Prost was calculation and control, a strategist who thought in seasons rather than corners. Senna was instinct and fire, a man who believed that if the car had to be pushed to its absolute edge to win, then the edge was exactly where he would live. Two philosophies of racing, two different definitions of courage, sharing a garage and a championship battle that split the entire sport into camps. In 1988, Senna claimed his first world championship, edging out his own teammate in a season defined by mutual brilliance and mounting tension. But it was 1989 and 1990 that turned the rivalry into legend, and into controversy. At the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix, the two McLarens collided at the chicane, a moment loaded with implication for the championship itself. Senna was later disqualified from the race under disputed circumstances, handing the title to Prost. It was a wound Senna carried, publicly and privately, a decision he believed had been unjust. A year later, at the very same corner, at the very same Suzuka circuit, fate, or perhaps something closer to reckoning, turned the tables. Senna and Prost, now driving for rival teams, collided again at the first corner, this time ending the race for both and handing Senna the 1990 World Championship. Two collisions, two titles decided in the same stretch of asphalt, forever entwining two men whose rivalry had become larger than the sport that hosted it. In 1991, Senna added a third world championship, cementing his place among the greatest to ever sit behind a wheel. Yet triumph was never the whole story. There was a growing legend of Senna as a driver who transcended the ordinary boundaries of racing, a man who spoke of near mystical experiences behind the wheel, of moments where he felt he was driving beyond conscious thought, tapping into something he could not fully explain even to himself. Off the track, a different portrait was forming as well. Of a man deeply devoted to his home country, funding education and welfare programs for underprivileged children in Brazil long before it was fashionable for athletes to speak of legacy. To Brazil, he was not simply a champion, he was a source of national pride during years when the country badly needed one. By 1994, Senna had moved to Williams, widely regarded as the strongest car on the grid, chasing what many believed would be a fourth title and perhaps a claim to being the greatest of all time. But the season began under a darker shadow than anyone anticipated. New regulations had stripped away technology the drivers had grown reliant upon, and the cars themselves felt unfamiliar, harder to trust. At the first race in Brazil, Senna retired early. At the second, in Japan, he was taken out in a first-lap collision. He arrived at the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola on the 1st of May, 1994, needing a strong result and carrying, by the accounts of those closest to him, a heavier sense of unease than usual. That weekend had already turned tragic before Senna even took to the grid. A horrifying crash in qualifying had badly injured Rubens Barrichello, and on race day itself, young driver Roland Ratzenberger had lost his life during qualifying, the sport's first fatality in years. Senna was reportedly shaken to his core, questioning aloud whether he should even race, yet still carrying the responsibility he felt as the sport's senior statesman and the head of the driver's safety body. He raced. On lap 7, leading the Grand Prix, his Williams left the racing line at the flat-out Tamburello corner and struck the concrete wall at devastating speed. Ayrton Senna was pronounced dead later that day, at the age of 34. The sport, and much of the world, stood still. Brazil declared 3 days of national mourning. An estimated 3 million people lined the streets for his funeral procession in São Paulo, a farewell befitting not just a champion, but a man many considered the embodiment of their country's hopes. In the aftermath, his death became the catalyst for the most sweeping safety revolution Formula One had ever undergone, reforms to circuits, to cars, to regulations, that have saved countless lives in the decades since. It is one of racing's most painful truths that Senna's death did as much to protect future generations of drivers as his life had done to inspire them. His legacy endures not only in 3 world championships and 65 pole positions, extraordinary numbers for his era, but in something harder to quantify. The Instituto Ayrton Senna, founded by his family, which has since reached millions of Brazilian children through education programs, carrying forward the very mission he had begun while he was still racing. Drivers who came decades after him still speak his name with a kind of reverence usually reserved for myth rather than history, describing him as the standard against which raw speed and racing instinct are measured. And perhaps that is the truest way to understand him. Not simply as a man who won races, but as a man who refused every ceiling placed in front of him, from a backyard kart in São Paulo to the summit of his sport, through storms both literal and personal, never conceding an inch of what he believed was possible. The rain that carried him to legend in 1984 never really stopped falling on the sport he changed forever, it simply became the standard by which every driver who dared to push through the impossible would be measured. Thank you for watching this story on TrackTales. If tales of speed, courage, and the drivers who changed racing forever move you the way they move us, hit subscribe and join us for more stories from the world of motorsport.